I'm Jennifer Savage, and I'm running for City Council in Ward 1. Professionally, I have an undergraduate degree in journalism, and I spent a few early career years working as a newspaper reporter and a copy editor. I have a master's degree in literary nonfiction, and I have spent most of my career working for nonprofits in Missoula. I have in doing that, I've worked for Blue Mountain Clinic, helping women access their health care. I've written grants on behalf of faculty and staff at the University of Montana. I've helped launch a healthcare foundation to improve the healthcare of Western Montanans. And most recently, I have helped nonprofit organizations and for-profit businesses tell their stories as a communications consultant. I have lived in Montana for 20 years, and I have lived in Ward 1 for 12 years. I grew up in North Carolina, the granddaughter of textile mill workers. I spent much of my early years at my grandmother's house. I watched her stand up for her community. I've watched other strong women stand up for their community. And this year, steeped in pandemic and sort of watching the world unfold, I was inspired by lots of women who decided to run for office for the first time, and I decided to stand up for my community and seek public office. Is Tyler, are you talking to me? No, it's okay. No, I just want to make sure. So the reason I'm interested in running
15 seconds.
Is the proximity of Ward 1, I believe, makes us particularly susceptible to the rapid growth that Missoula is experiencing. And I want to be a strong voice for my neighbors and my community. And I feel like I can be a good connector and someone who can work with other people and listen and help us have the hard conversations that we may need to have in the coming years.
Time.
Sorry about that. We thought that we were muted, and sorry. So I'm excited to introduce Jennifer. She's lived in Montana for 20 years. I've known Jennifer from being my sister's neighbor on the north side, and every interaction I've had with her has been so genuine and so just wonderful that I am excited to introduce her to the Missoula County Dems, and think she would be a great addition to Missoula City Council. And just thank you for running.
I think some of these have been mentioned, but I will mention them again. I think listening to the voices in our community is super important. I think it's also important to do research and read data, talk to city employees, also do our own sort of independent research. I also think transparency is something that I'm super interested in. And so in making decisions, I would be interested in looking at things through a transparency lens. I would also be interested in looking at things through a social justice lens, an equity lens, an environmental lens. How do these things play into the particular proposal that's in front of us? I'd also be interested in elevating the voices of those who have traditionally had less access to power, and how can we do that in terms of making this particular decision? And I think that another piece would be, how can this particular decision or proposal or whatever leverage the next one? And what does this look like in the big picture? These different decisions are not made in terms of being isolated. And so what does it look like? What would this particular thing look like in terms of a larger picture, a larger plan, a vision that's sort of greater than one specific thing? I was working at the University of Montana when the sexual assault sort of big stories broke. I think it was my first day of work, and they were sentencing one of the young men who was on trial at the time. And in that time, having worked at the university through those years where it was particularly challenging and difficult, I think the university learned a lot of lessons. They learned a lot of lessons about how they drop the ball in so many ways, how also they sort of, putting on my professional hat here, did not clearly communicate or embrace transparency during that time. I also think because so many, or because our police officers were also under scrutiny during that time, they probably also learned a lot of things as well. And I think, are there things to improve upon? Always. When it comes to the cultural moment that Me Too brought about, I think that there's so much more heightened awareness about this issue, and I'm grateful that it's there. That I think it opened up space for lots of different organizations, including probably the police department, to be able to make some improvements, improve victim services. But the dedication of the people who were working on those cases was clear, and it was clear all along. And so, when I hear that, say, Guy Baker, for example, is working on trafficking, that gives me a lot of hope, actually, for that particular issue. And, I've spent my career working at nonprofits in places like Blue Mountain Clinic. I've written grants for the YWCA. And when I think about how we can sort of move forward and improve, I think empowering those kinds of organizations, supporting those kinds of organizations in the critical work that they do with victims would be one thing that I would suggest. And I also agree with Jordan that there is a real link with the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that also needs to be highlighted as well. I agree. The list is long of ideas because you're asking a magic wand question. And I think that for me, I spent the last 6 months in my day job researching, reading, doing a lot of deep diving on TIF. And if I could do one thing, I think it would be to do what other communities have done and get creative with the use of TIF and be able to fund some affordable housing. I think we've seen it in places like Austin, Portland, Chicago, Minneapolis. There are lots of good models out there. I realize TIF is a statute, and so there's some like legislative play there as well. But I think that it could go a long way in sort of the long-term funding of affordable housing. And then also on the list, of course, are livable wage. I also agree with Jordan about the updated zoning. And I would find some magical way to fund childcare. Women were disproportionately affected by this pandemic. Lots of women are out of work because they are home taking care of their children. And I don't know how that works, but if you're asking me a magic wand question, that's one I would throw on the list. Thank you again for allowing us this opportunity. It's been really great to hear from everybody and great to see everyone. Thank you for taking our health into consideration last week as we postponed this, and I appreciate that we were able to do this over Zoom and do it as quickly as you were able to pivot. I'm running for council because I'm interested in talking about housing. I'm interested in talking about COVID recovery. I'm interested in talking about climate. I'm also interested in elevating voices that aren't often heard. I am tenacious. I'm a hard worker. I'm a quick study. I would really appreciate your endorsement. I believe this work is about relationship building, and I know how to build relationships. Thank you again.